The axe blade caught moonlight like frozen lightning as it arced through the bitter December air. Blood sprayed across whitewashed walls, while 3 bodies collapsed onto the stone floor of Ashford Manor's kitchen, their cries silencing forever the cruelest voices in County Dublin. This is the story of how one Irish maid's desperate act of self-defense became a catalyst that would shake the foundations of British colonial rule in 1847 Ireland. The wind howled through Dublin's cobblestone streets on December 20th, 1847, carrying the scent of peat smoke and desperation. Inside the grand estate of Ashford Manor, the texture of fear felt as real as the rough hemp rope that bound servants to their stations. Esther O'Brien knelt beside the kitchen hearth, her knuckles raw from scrubbing floors that would never be clean enough for the Ashford family's standards. At 19, Esther had already survived 2 years of indentured servitude under the iron fist of Lord William Ashford and his 2 sons, Thomas and Edmund. The potato famine had driven her family from their small farm in County Cork, forcing her into a 7-year contract that felt more like a prison sentence than employment. Her wages of 2 shillings per week barely covered the room and board deducted by the Ashfords, leaving her trapped in a cycle of poverty that stretched endlessly ahead. The kitchen door slammed open, with enough force to rattle the copper pots hanging from their hooks. Lord Ashford stormed in, his face flushed with whiskey and rage, followed closely by his sons. Thomas, 24, and cruel as his father, carried a leather strap in his right hand. Edmund, 2 years younger but equally vicious, blocked the servant's entrance. "Where is it?" Lord Ashford's voice boomed off the stone walls. "Where is the silver candlestick from the dining room?" Esther's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew nothing about any missing candlestick, but accusations in the Ashford household were tantamount to convictions. 3 servants had already been dismissed without wages over supposed thefts, leaving them to face Dublin's winter streets with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Before we descend deeper into this night of violence that would echo through Irish history, where are you watching from right now? What time is it in your corner of the world? Drop a comment below and let me know. If stories of resistance against impossible odds fascinate you, hit that like button and subscribe, because what happened in that kitchen changed everything. "I haven't touched anything, my lord," Esther whispered, her Irish accent thick with terror. The other servants had vanished, leaving her alone with the 3 men who held her fate in their hands. Thomas stepped forward, the leather strap whistling through the air. "Father, let me remind this Irish dog about respect." The first blow caught Esther across her shoulders, driving her to the floor. The second split the skin on her forearms as she tried to protect herself. But it was Lord Ashford's words that cut deepest. "Perhaps a night in the cellar with the rats will improve your memory. Or maybe we should send you back to Cork. Let the famine finish what we started." Rage bloomed in Esther's chest, like a fire catching dry timber. Her family had died from the famine's grip. Her younger brother, barely 12, had succumbed to starvation while she worked to send money home. These men had profited from Ireland's suffering, collecting rents from desperate farmers while exporting grain to England. As Thomas raised the strap for another blow, Esther's hand found something solid behind her. The woodsman's axe, left by the kitchen door after the day's work splitting kindling. Her fingers wrapped around the worn wooden handle. Time slowed to the rhythm of her thundering heartbeat. She could surrender to another beating, another night locked in darkness, another year of servitude that might stretch into 7. Or she could finally fight back against the system that had destroyed everything she loved. But what happens when the powerless discover they have more strength than they ever imagined? What price would Esther pay for 3 moments of rebellion that would change her life forever? The axe felt surprisingly light in her hands as she rose from the kitchen floor, and 3 men who had never known fear were about to learn its bitter taste. The first swing caught Thomas Ashford across the chest before he could raise his hands to defend himself. The leather strap fell from his fingers as he staggered backward, crimson spreading across his white shirt like spilled wine on pristine linen. In 1847 Ireland, Striking a British landlord meant automatic death by hanging. But Esther O'Brien had already crossed a line from which there was no return. Lord Ashford's mouth opened in shock rather than pain, his whiskey-addled mind struggling to process what his eyes witnessed. No Irish servant had ever dared raise a hand against him, let alone wielded a weapon in his own kitchen. His empire of cruelty rested on the absolute certainty that the oppressed would never fight back. Edmund lunged toward the servant's bell that would summon help from the main house, but Esther's second swing caught him at the base of his skull. The impact sent him crashing into the stone wall, his body crumpling like a discarded puppet. The kitchen fell silent except for the crackling of the dying fire and Lord Ashford's labored breathing. "You mad Irish witch," he gasped, fumbling for the pistol he kept tucked in his waistband. "You've just signed your own death warrant." But Esther moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent her childhood helping her father split firewood. The third and final swing silenced Lord Ashford forever, his body joining his son's on the kitchen floor that she had scrubbed clean just hours before. Blood pooled beneath the three corpses, seeping into the grooves between stones worn smooth by decades of servants' feet. The metallic scent mingled with the lingering aroma of the evening's roast beef, creating a nauseating perfume that would haunt Esther's dreams for the rest of her life. From the Cork Examiner, December 22, 1847. Tragedy strikes Ashford Manor. 3 members of prominent landlord family found murdered. Irish maid suspected of fleeing into winter night. The grandfather clock in the main hall chimed 11 times, each note echoing through corridors where other servants cowered behind locked doors. They had heard the shouting, the sounds of struggle, the sudden silence that followed, but not one emerged to investigate or assist. Mrs. Margaret Henley, the head housekeeper, later testified that she recognized Esther's voice during the altercation, but chose to remain in her quarters. "We learned long ago that interfering in the master's business brought only trouble," she told the magistrate weeks later. Her words captured the calculated indifference of people who had survived by becoming invisible. What would you have done, listening to violence unfold in the room below? Would you have risked your own safety to intervene? Or would you have pulled your blanket over your head and pretended to sleep? Esther stood in the blood-soaked kitchen, the axe trembling in her grip. She had dreamed of this moment during countless nights of hunger and humiliation, but the reality felt nothing like the fantasy. The 3 men who had tormented her lay motionless, their reign of cruelty ended by her desperate act of self-defense. Death changes everything instantly. The sound of approaching hoofbeats on the cobblestone drive shattered her paralysis. The constabulary made their evening rounds at midnight, and Lord Ashford's failure to appear at his study window would raise immediate suspicion. Esther had perhaps 20 minutes before her world collapsed entirely. She dropped the axe and ran toward the servants' quarters, her blood-stained apron leaving a trail that would soon guide hunting dogs to her scent. But Esther O'Brien had survived 2 years of systematic brutality by learning to think 3 steps ahead of her tormentors. What she did next would transform a simple case of justified homicide into a legend that would inspire Irish rebels for generations to come. Candlelight flickered against whitewashed walls as Esther burst into the servants' quarters, her blood-stained hands leaving crimson fingerprints on the wooden doorframe. The acrid smell of tallow mixed with the musty dampness of wool blankets, while rough burlap scratched against her skin as she grabbed her meager possessions. But Esther O'Brien had not survived 2 years of British cruelty without learning that survival required allies, not just courage. "Mary," she whispered urgently to the figure huddled beneath thin covers in the adjacent cot. "Mary, wake up. I need your help." Mary Sullivan, a fellow County Cork native who had worked as a scullery maid for 3 years, opened her eyes immediately. She had been listening to the sounds from the kitchen, waiting for either screaming or silence to determine Esther's fate. The blood on her friend's apron told the complete story without words. "Sweet Mary, Mother of God," Mary breathed, crossing herself. "What have you done?" "What I had to do," Esther replied, stuffing her spare dress and the small wooden cross her mother had carved into a burlap sack. "They were going to kill me, Mary, slowly, over months and years, but kill me just the same." The two women had whispered countless conversations about escape during their brief moments of rest. They knew the routes used by smugglers moving goods between Dublin and the countryside. They understood which constables could be bribed and which would shoot Irish fugitives on sight. Most importantly, they had identified the network of Catholic families who secretly aided escaped servants despite the severe legal penalties. Mary made her decision with the speed of someone who had already calculated every angle. "Patrick O'Malley," she said, referring to the baker who supplied bread to Ashford Manor. "He leaves for Cork at dawn with his wagon. Hidden compartments for smuggling grain past the British export inspections." The sound of horses grew louder on the cobblestone drive. Constable William Morrison and his deputy were making their routine patrol, expecting to see Lord Ashford's familiar silhouette in the study window. When that window remained dark, they would investigate immediately. Esther and Mary crept through the servants' corridors like shadows, avoiding floorboards they knew would creak under pressure. Behind locked doors, other servants listened to their footsteps, but remained silent. The unspoken code of survival demanded willful ignorance when fellow servants faced mortal danger. But Thomas Brady, the stable boy who had endured regular beatings from Edmund Ashford, did something unexpected. He left his door slightly ajar and whispered as the women passed, "The back gate key hangs behind the water barrel. The dogs are chained on the east side tonight." These small acts of complicity would save Esther's life, while damning others who chose differently. The head butler, Samuel Fitzpatrick, had already decided to inform the constables about suspicious activity in the servants' quarters. His loyalty to the British system outweighed any solidarity with his fellow Irish workers. Justice moves in whispers sometimes. The two women reached the kitchen door just as Constable Morrison's boots echoed on the front steps. Esther paused to look at the three bodies sprawled across the floor, their blood now congealing into dark pools that reflected the dying embers of the fire. She felt no remorse, only a strange emptiness where her fear had lived for 2 years. "They look smaller in death," she murmured to Mary. "I thought monsters would be larger." Mary pulled her friend toward the door, but Esther stopped to retrieve something from Lord Ashford's body. His leather purse contained 43 pounds sterling, more money than she had seen in her entire life. She also took his signet ring, not for its gold value, but for what it represented, proof that the untouchable William Ashford was as mortal as any Irish peasant. The back gate stood 50 yards across an open courtyard, where moonlight would expose them to anyone watching from the main house windows. But the alternative was certain capture when Morrison discovered the bodies and raised the alarm throughout Dublin. What drives someone to risk everything for freedom? What calculations occur in the moment between safety and rebellion? As they reached for the gate key, footsteps thundered through the main house toward the kitchen. Constable Morrison had noticed the dark study window and decided to investigate immediately rather than wait for morning. The hunt for Esther O'Brien was about to begin in earnest, but she had already vanished into Dublin's maze of alleys, where the British rule of law meant nothing compared to Irish loyalty. The wagon wheels creaked against frozen cobblestones as Patrick O'Malley's bread cart rumbled through Dublin's pre-dawn darkness. Beneath sacks of flour and hidden behind false panels, Esther O'Brien lay curled in a space barely large enough for her body, the scent of yeast and grain filling her nostrils, while rough wooden boards pressed against her spine. By sunrise, every constable in County Dublin would be searching for the Irish Maid who had murdered 3 members of Britain's landed gentry. O'Malley had asked no questions when Mary Sullivan appeared at his bakery door at 4:30 a.m., requesting passage for a friend in desperate circumstances. The baker understood that knowledge could become a death sentence when British authorities began their interrogations. He simply nodded, pointed to the hidden compartment he used for smuggling grain past export restrictions, and continued kneading dough as if nothing unusual had occurred. The wagon joined a stream of early morning traffic, heading southwest toward Cork. Farmers drove cattle to market, merchants transported goods between towns, and British patrols conducted their routine inspections with the bored efficiency of men who had performed the same duty for years. To them, O'Malley's bread cart represented nothing more threatening than commerce. But hidden in that cramped compartment, Esther clutched Lord Ashford's signet ring while planning her next moves with the methodical precision of someone who understood that survival required strategy, not just luck. From the Dublin Castle records, December 21st, 1847. Alert issued for Esther O'Brien, Irish female, approximately 19 years, wanted for triple murder. Reward of £100 offered for information leading to capture. Armed and extremely dangerous. The first checkpoint appeared at Clondalkin, where Sergeant Murphy conducted perfunctory searches of wagons leaving Dublin. O'Malley presented his transport papers with the calm confidence of a man who had navigated British bureaucracy for 15 years. His cart carried legitimate bread deliveries to Cork. His documentation was flawless, and his demeanor suggested nothing more interesting than another routine business trip. "Any passengers today, Patrick?" Murphy asked, though his inspection consisted of little more than lifting a few flour sacks. "Just me and the bread, Sergeant." Same as always. The wagon rolled past the checkpoint without incident, but Esther could hear her heartbeat thundering in her ears like horse hooves on stone. Discovery would mean immediate hanging, without trial. British justice in Ireland operated under martial law, where suspected rebels faced execution within hours of capture. 20 miles outside Dublin, O'Malley finally stopped beside a small stream where water gurgled over smooth stones, and the air carried the clean scent of winter pine. He knocked twice on the wagon's side, signaling that Esther could emerge from her hiding place. "Stretch your legs, lass," he said kindly. "We've got 6 hours to Cork, and the next checkpoint won't be as friendly as Murphy." Esther climbed from the compartment with muscles cramped from confinement. The Irish countryside stretched endlessly in all directions, brown fields dotted with stone walls and bare trees that looked like skeletal fingers against the gray sky. Freedom felt as vast and terrifying as that landscape. Blood has its own geography. O'Malley shared his morning meal of brown bread and butter while explaining the route ahead. "There's a British garrison at Naas that searches every wagon thoroughly. Young Lieutenant Collins runs it like his own personal kingdom. We'll need to be clever there." He had prepared for this possibility by baking hollow loaves that could conceal small items. Esther would hide Lord Ashford's ring and purse inside the bread while remaining in her compartment. If soldiers discovered the hidden space, she would claim to be O'Malley's pregnant daughter traveling to Cork for medical care. "And if they don't believe the story?" Esther asked. O'Malley's expression darkened. "Then we pray the good Lord has mercy on our souls, because the British certainly won't." The second half of their journey would test every aspect of their deception, but unknown to both fugitive and rescuer, Constable Morrison had already connected Esther's disappearance to the missing stable boy Thomas Brady, whose empty bed suggested complicity in her escape. The manhunt was expanding beyond Dublin's borders. With the methodical efficiency of a military operation, every road, every port, every known refuge for Irish rebels would face scrutiny within hours. What price would others pay for helping one woman escape the consequences of justified violence? How many lives would British vengeance claim in pursuit of Irish justice? As O'Malley's wagon approached the Naas garrison, 3 soldiers emerged from the guardhouse with rifles ready, and suspicion burning in their eyes like winter fire. Lieutenant James Collins emerged from the stone guardhouse with his uniform pristine. Despite the December cold, the brass buttons catching weak sunlight, while his breath formed white clouds in the frigid air. The sound of his polished boots striking cobblestones echoed off the garrison walls like gunshots, and the leather of his holster creaked as he adjusted his pistol with practiced authority. This 23-year-old English officer had built his reputation on catching Irish smugglers and rebels, viewing every civilian as a potential enemy of the crown. Collins had received the alert about Esther O'Brien just 30 minutes earlier, along with detailed descriptions of known accomplices and escape routes. His methodical nature and deep suspicion of Irish loyalty made him the most dangerous obstacle between Esther and freedom. Unlike the bored Sergeant Murphy in Clondalkin, Collins treated every inspection as a potential breakthrough in his career advancement. "Papers," Collins demanded as O'Malley brought his wagon to a halt. Two soldiers flanked the cart with rifles ready, their eyes scanning for any sign of deception or hidden cargo. O'Malley produced his transport documents with steady hands, though sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold. "Bread delivery to Cork, Lieutenant. Same route I've traveled for 15 years. Collins examined every stamp, signature, and seal with the intensity of a scholar studying ancient manuscripts. He had discovered 3 smuggling operations in the past month by noticing minor discrepancies in paperwork that other officers ignored. His thoroughness had earned commendations from Dublin Castle and hatred from Irish merchants. "Step down from the wagon," Collins ordered. "Private Sullivan, conduct a full search." The young soldier began systematically removing flour sacks, probing beneath the driver's seat, and testing floorboards for hidden compartments. O'Malley maintained his calm exterior while mentally calculating how long Esther could remain silent in her cramped hiding space. The compartment's ventilation allowed only minimal airflow, and panic could cause her to gasp or shift position. Inside her wooden prison, Esther pressed her hand over her mouth to muffle her breathing. She could hear boots moving around the wagon, voices discussing search procedures, the metallic clicks of rifles being adjusted. Every sound amplified her terror, until she felt certain the soldiers could hear her heartbeat through the wagon boards. Collins noticed something that made him pause. "This flour sack feels lighter than the others. Private Morrison, bring the bayonet." The bayonet pierced the burlap with a sharp tearing sound, releasing a cascade of white flour onto the muddy ground. Collins examined the contents carefully, then moved to the next sack with the same methodical precision. He was 3 sacks away from discovering Esther's hiding place. Death waits in silence sometimes, but fate intervened in the form of a messenger from Dublin Castle, his horse lathered with sweat from hard riding. "Lieutenant Collins, urgent dispatch from Captain Stewart." The message contained new intelligence about Esther's escape route. Informants suggested she had fled north toward Belfast rather than south toward Cork. The Dublin authorities were redirecting their search accordingly, leaving Collins to choose between continuing his current inspection or joining the main manhunt. Collins studied O'Malley's face for any telltale signs of relief or nervousness. The baker maintained his expression of patient cooperation, though his knuckles showed white where he gripped the wagon's rail. These were the moments when years of deception either succeeded or collapsed into catastrophe. "Private Sullivan, finish the search quickly," Collins ordered. "We may need to redirect north within the hour." The soldier's inspection became more cursory as he focused on speed rather than thoroughness. He checked 3 more sacks without discovering the hidden compartment, then stepped back to report his findings. "Nothing suspicious, Lieutenant. Standard bread delivery." Collins walked around the wagon one final time, his instincts telling him something remained hidden despite his soldier's thorough search. But the urgency of joining the northern manhunt outweighed his suspicions about one Irish baker's routine delivery. "Move along," he commanded finally. "And O'Malley, if I discover you've been less than truthful with me, I'll see you hang alongside any rebels you're harboring." The wagon rolled away from Naas Garrison with excruciating slowness, O'Malley maintaining his horse's normal pace despite every instinct screaming to flee at maximum speed. Collins watched until they disappeared around a bend, then turned to prepare his unit for the journey to Belfast. What he never discovered was that the messenger had been sent by Mary Sullivan, using information provided by Catholic priests who operated their own intelligence network throughout Ireland. The misdirection had saved Esther's life by mere minutes. But in her hidden compartment, Esther O'Brien was discovering that survival sometimes felt worse than capture, as cramped muscles and stale air pushed her consciousness toward a dangerous edge of panic. The final 20 miles to Cork would test whether freedom was worth the price she had already paid, and the much higher price that others would soon be asked to pay for her sake. The wagon wheels ground to a halt outside McCarthy's tavern, as evening shadows stretched across Cork's narrow streets, the air thick with the smell of peat smoke and boiled cabbage, while frost began forming on window panes that reflected candlelight like scattered stars. Inside the hidden compartment, Esther O'Brien had lost consciousness twice during the final hours of the journey, her body pushed beyond endurance by fear and confinement. Cork represented either salvation or the end of her desperate flight, depending on whether the Catholic underground network could hide her from British justice. Patrick O'Malley knocked on the tavern's side door using a specific rhythm: 3 short, 2 long, 1 short. The coded signal identified him to Seamus McCarthy, whose establishment served as both public house and secret way station for Irish rebels fleeing British persecution. McCarthy had hidden dozens of fugitives over the past decade, using a network of concealed rooms and tunnels that connected to the city's medieval underground. "She's barely breathing," O'Malley whispered as they carried Esther's unconscious form into the tavern's back room. 20 hours in that compartment nearly killed her. McCarthy's wife, Brigid, immediately took charge with the efficiency of someone who had nursed wounded rebels back to health countless times before. She administered water mixed with whiskey to revive Esther, while checking for signs of serious injury or illness. The hidden room smelled of herbs and lamp oil, its stone walls dampened by centuries of Cork's coastal moisture. Esther's eyes fluttered open to see 2 strangers leaning over her with expressions of concern rather than hostility. For the first time in 2 years, she found herself surrounded by people who viewed her as a human being rather than property to be exploited. "Easy, child," Brigid murmured in Irish Gaelic. "You're safe now. The British can't reach you here." But safety was a relative concept. When the Crown had placed a 100-pound bounty on Esther's head, that amount represented more money than most Irish families would see in 5 years, creating powerful incentives for betrayal, even among natural allies. From the Cork Examiner, December 22, 1847, manhunt intensifies for Ashford Manor murderess. Roadblocks established on all routes leading from Dublin. Citizens urged to report suspicious activity to local constables immediately. McCarthy explained the situation with brutal honesty. "Every constable in Ireland will be searching for you within days. We can hide you temporarily, but permanent safety requires leaving the country entirely. Ships depart Cork Harbor for America twice weekly, but passenger manifests are checked against wanted lists." The underground network had developed sophisticated methods for creating false identities. A forger named Connor O'Sullivan specialized in documents that could pass British scrutiny, while sympathetic ship captains occasionally transported fugitives without recording their names officially. But these services required payment that Esther could provide, using Lord Ashford's stolen purse. Revenge finances its own justice. As Brigid prepared a meal of bread and mutton stew, she shared intelligence gathered from other safe houses throughout Ireland. The British authorities had arrested Thomas Brady, the stable boy who helped Esther escape, subjecting him to interrogation that bordered on torture. He had revealed nothing useful, but his continued imprisonment sent a clear message about the price of assisting Irish rebels. "They've also taken Mary Sullivan for questioning," Brigid added quietly. "The girl who brought you to O'Malley. She disappeared from Ashford Manor the morning after the murders." Esther's heart sank as she realized the cost of her freedom was being paid by others. Mary had risked everything to help a friend, and now faced the full weight of British vengeance. The stable boy's loyalty had earned him a cell in Dublin Castle's notorious dungeons, where prisoners regularly died from cold, starvation, or infected wounds. What moral calculus justifies one person's liberation when it destroys multiple innocent lives? How do the oppressed choose between individual survival and collective responsibility? McCarthy outlined the escape plan, while Esther struggled with guilt over her friend's suffering. A merchant ship called the St. Patrick would depart for Boston on December 28th, carrying Irish immigrants seeking opportunities in America. The captain, James Murphy, had agreed to transport one additional passenger whose name would not appear on any official documents. The passage cost £12, McCarthy explained. O'Sullivan's forged papers will cost another $8. You'll have enough remaining from Ashford's purse to establish yourself in Boston, assuming you survive the winter crossing. But first, Esther would need to remain hidden in Cork for 6 days while British searches intensified throughout the countryside. Every hour increased the risk that someone would recognize her face or connect her presence to the reward money that could transform their lives. As night fell over Cork Harbor, ships' bells echoed across water that reflected torchlight like liquid gold, while somewhere in Dublin Castle's dungeons, Mary Sullivan screamed under questioning that would determine whether Esther O'Brien would live to see American shores. Dublin Castle's interrogation chamber echoed with the sound of dripping water and muffled screams as Captain Robert Stewart applied systematic pressure to extract information from Mary Sullivan. The stone walls, slick with centuries of dampness, had witnessed countless confessions torn from Irish prisoners through methods that left no visible marks but broke spirits like kindling, snapped across a knee. Mary had endured 3 days of questioning without revealing Esther O'Brien's destination or the network that facilitated her escape. Stewart represented the new breed of British intelligence officer, educated at Oxford and trained in psychological manipulation techniques that proved more effective than crude physical torture. He understood that every person possessed a breaking point, and finding that weakness required patience and careful observation rather than immediate brutality. "Your friend has murdered 3 prominent members of the British establishment," Stewart said calmly, pacing around Mary's chair with predatory grace. "Harboring a fugitive of her caliber carries the death penalty. However, cooperation could reduce your sentence to transportation rather than hanging. Transportation to Australia meant 7 years of hard labor in conditions that killed 30% of prisoners before their sentences ended. But hanging meant immediate death, making Stewart's offer appear merciful by comparison. This calculated display of leniency was designed to create hope that could be manipulated into betrayal. Mary kept her eyes focused on a crack in the stone floor, using meditation techniques learned from Catholic priests who had survived similar interrogations. She recited Hail Mary silently, while Stewart described in detail what happened to Irish women in Australian penal colonies. His words painted pictures of brutality and despair, designed to break her resolve. Meanwhile, Thomas Brady occupied a cell 3 floors below, his body bearing the evidence of more direct persuasion methods. The stable boy had revealed nothing, despite beatings that left him barely conscious, his loyalty to Esther absolute, even in the face of death. His silence had become legendary among other prisoners, who whispered his name as an example of Irish courage under impossible pressure. Guilt carves deeper than any blade. In Cork, Esther spent her 4th day of hiding, consumed by knowledge of her friend's suffering. McCarthy's network provided regular updates about the interrogations, each report deepening her anguish over the price others paid for her freedom. She had killed 3 men to escape bondage, but discovered that liberation carried its own chains forged from responsibility and remorse. "I should surrender," she told Bridget McCarthy during one of her darkest moments. "Let them hang me and spare Mary and Thomas further torture." Bridget's response carried the wisdom of someone who had watched the Irish independence movement destroy and redeem countless lives. "Child, their sacrifice means nothing if you throw away what they died to give you. Honor their courage by living free, not by dying uselessly." The forger Connor O'Sullivan had completed Esther's new identity documents, transforming her into Catherine Murphy, a widow from County Kerry seeking passage to Boston to join relatives. The papers would pass casual inspection, but might not survive detailed scrutiny by experienced customs officials who specialized in detecting Irish fugitives. From Dublin Castle intelligence files, December 26, 1847. Sullivan and Brady maintained silence despite intensive questioning. Recommend escalating measures to extract actionable intelligence before subjects expire from interrogation stress. Stewart's patience was nearing its end. His superiors expected results, and continued failure to locate Esther O'Brien threatened his career advancement. The decision to employ more extreme methods reflected both desperation and the British Empire's willingness to sacrifice Irish lives for political objectives. On Christmas Eve, Mary Sullivan's screams finally stopped echoing through Dublin Castle's corridors. Whether from death or unconsciousness, the silence marked a turning point in the investigation. Stewart had broken her spirit, if not her loyalty, extracting fragmentary information about safe houses and transportation routes that would guide the manhunt's next phase. Thomas Brady died on Christmas morning, his body found hanging in his cell under circumstances the official report described as suicide. Prison guards claimed he had used strips torn from his shirt to fashion a noose, but other inmates reported hearing sounds of struggle during the night. His death eliminated the last witness to Esther's escape route. Christmas bells rang across Dublin, while two people who had risked everything for friendship lay cold in unmarked graves, their sacrifice known only to the woman whose freedom had cost their lives. The St. Patrick prepared for departure on December 28th, its hold filled with Irish emigrants fleeing famine and oppression. Among them would be one passenger whose true identity must remain hidden until American shores offered sanctuary beyond British reach. But Captain Stewart had decoded enough of Mary's broken confessions to focus his search on Cork Harbor, where ships bound for America represented the last hope for Irish fugitives seeking permanent escape from Crown justice. Cork Harbor stretched gray and restless under December's final dawn, the water lapping against stone quays with sounds like whispered prayers, while salt spray mixed with chimney smoke from ships preparing for the Atlantic crossing. The St. Patrick's crew loaded final cargo under Captain James Murphy's watchful eye, each crate and barrel representing Irish hopes carried toward American promises. Among the passengers gathering on the dock, one woman clutched forged papers that would either deliver her to freedom or condemn her to the gallows if British authorities discovered her true identity. Esther O'Brien, now Catherine Murphy, according to Conor O'Sullivan's expertly crafted documents, had spent 6 sleepless nights in McCarthy's hidden room, listening to footsteps in the street above and wondering which sound might herald her capture. The guilt over Mary Sullivan and Thomas Brady's deaths had carved hollow spaces in her chest where confidence once lived, leaving her questioning whether survival justified such terrible costs. Captain Murphy recognized her immediately, despite the forged identity, having been briefed by McCarthy about the passenger whose name would never appear in his official manifest. Murphy's weathered face revealed nothing as he examined her papers with the same casual attention given to other emigrants, but his eyes held understanding, born from years of smuggling Irish rebels away from British justice. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Murphy," he said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Your cabin is prepared below deck. We sail with the morning tide." The final moments before departure brought both relief and terror. Esther could see British soldiers conducting routine inspections of other vessels, their red uniforms bright against the gray morning, as they checked passenger lists and examined documents. Captain Stewart's investigation had indeed focused on Cork Harbor, but his attention was directed toward larger ships bound for New York rather than the modest merchant vessel heading to Boston. But freedom remained fragile until Irish waters disappeared behind the horizon. The St. Patrick slipped away from Cork Harbor at 7:43 a.m. on December 28, 1847, carrying 42 official passengers and one ghost who existed only in forged documents and desperate hope. Esther stood at the stern, watching Ireland shrink into morning mist, understanding that she would never again see the country that had shaped her through suffering and blood. From the ship's unofficial log, maintained by Captain Murphy, departed Cork with standard passenger manifest, plus one additional soul-seeking redemption across the Atlantic. May God grant safe passage to all who flee injustice. The crossing to Boston would take 6 weeks if weather cooperated, but winter Atlantic storms could extend the journey indefinitely or end it permanently beneath waves that had swallowed countless Irish emigrants seeking better lives. Esther's survival of British justice meant nothing if the ocean claimed her before she reached American shores. During the voyage, she learned that news of the Ashford Manor murders had spread throughout Ireland and beyond. Ballads celebrating her act of rebellion were sung in taverns across County Cork, while British newspapers described her as a bloodthirsty savage who had murdered innocent landlords in their own home. The truth, as always, depended entirely on the perspective of those telling the story. Other passengers aboard the St. Patrick shared their own tales of British oppression and Irish resistance. Each story added weight to the understanding that Esther's violence was neither unique nor unprecedented, but part of a larger pattern of brutality and retaliation that defined the relationship between colonizer and colonized. The ocean holds all secrets equally. 3 weeks into the voyage, word reached them through signals exchanged with another Irish ship that Captain Stewart had discovered McCarthy's safe house network. Raids across Cork had netted dozens of arrests, with interrogations revealing the full extent of the Catholic Underground Railroad that had facilitated Esther's escape. Seamus and Bridget McCarthy had died during the raid on their tavern, choosing to fight rather than surrender. Connor O'Sullivan, the forger, had vanished completely, his workshop burned and his whereabouts unknown. The entire network that had saved Esther's life had been systematically destroyed in retaliation for her successful escape. The price of one woman's freedom was measured in dozens of Irish lives lost to British vengeance. This knowledge would haunt Esther through her remaining years in America, where she eventually established herself as a seamstress in Boston's Irish community, never speaking publicly about the winter night when she had struck back against her oppressors with an axe that changed everything. Local fishermen still tell stories about ghost ships that sail from Cork Harbor on winter nights, carrying passengers whose names appear on no earthly manifest, captained by souls who died protecting Irish freedom from British tyranny. They say if you listen carefully during December storms, you can hear the sound of an axe striking wood mixed with the wind howling across the waves. We're only scratching the surface. The next case is even darker. Subscribe before it drops.